Welcome to CBR, the upcoming Daredevil Born Again series, which is set to premiere on March 4th, 2025, has fans buzzing with excitement for the return of Matt Murdock, Charlie Cox, and his longtime nemesis, Wilson Fisk, Vincent D'Onofrio. Today on CBR, we're diving into what fans need to know going into the series. Daredevil Born Again picks up 5 years after the events of Daredevil Season 3, 2018, marking a fresh start for the characters while drawing inspiration from Frank Miller's iconic Born Again comic arc. However, while the series pulls elements from the source material, it's not a direct adaptation, and instead, we're in for a more modern and evolving take on the characters' ongoing struggles. For those who might need a refresher, Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, has one of the more tragic and complicated origin stories in Marvel Comics. Created by Stan Lee, Bill Everett, and Jack Kirby in 1964, Matt's story begins with a childhood accident that left him without sight. While attempting to save a pedestrian from an oncoming truck, Matt was doused with radioactive chemicals. Instead of losing his other senses, the accident heightened them, giving him extraordinary hearing, touch, and smell. This was both a blessing and a curse, shaping him into a vigilante who could take on criminals by night while struggling to maintain a normal life by day. Matt's alter ego, Daredevil, emerged from the streets of Hell's Kitchen, where he was raised by his father, a boxer who was ultimately murdered by mobsters. To cope with his growing abilities, Matt sought out Stick, a mysterious figure who trained him in combat and introduced him to the secret war against the Hand, a deadly ninja organization. By day, Matt fought for justice in the courtroom alongside his best friend and law partner, Foggy Nelson. But by night, he donned the red suit and became a symbol of fear for New York's criminals. The Daredevil Netflix series, 2015 to 2018, took all of this, amped up the grit, and turned it into a gritty, realistic drama that explored Matt's evolution as a vigilante. The first season introduced Foggy Nelson as Matt's law partner and best friend. Also, Karen Page becomes the duo's office manager, but later becomes a journalist, and eventually takes a larger role in what becomes Nelson, Murdock, and Page. The first season also introduced fans to Wilson Fisk, the ruthless Kingpin, whose plans to reshape New York City clashed with Matt's sense of justice. Season 2 brought in Elektra Natchios and Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, two complex characters who tested Matt's moral code. Meanwhile, the Defenders event, 2017, brought the street-level heroes of New York together, only for Matt to suffer a life-altering injury. Season 3 saw Matt at rock bottom. After barely surviving a building collapse at the end of the Defenders, Matt lost everything: his law practice, his reputation, and his faith. Enter Wilson Fisk, who, now out of prison and more dangerous than ever, manipulated the FBI, pitted Daredevil against the deadly assassin Bullseye, and set in motion Matt's personal and professional downfall. The season was a thrilling exploration of Matt's resilience, but it also set the stage for a much larger battle with Fisk. The season finale saw Matt triumph, but it wasn't without cost, leaving the door open for new challenges. The rivalry between Daredevil and Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, is one of the most iconic and personal battles in Marvel Comics. And honestly, it's one of those that just defines both characters. These two aren't just your standard hero-villain matchup. They've built a personal vendetta against each other that runs so deep it goes beyond just fighting crime and corruption. While Fisk has tangled with other heroes like Spider-Man, it was his ongoing clashes with Daredevil that solidified him as a major figure in the Marvel universe, turning him into one of the most dangerous and calculating villains out there. Let's talk about how this all started with Daredevil's origins. Matt Murdock's journey to becoming Daredevil kicks off with the tragic accident in Hell's Kitchen. Under the training of Stick, a blind martial arts master, Matt honed his skills, turning into a pretty lethal fighter. But here's the thing, Matt was also a lawyer by day, forming the law firm Nelson and Murdock with his best friend, Foggy Nelson. But as he worked within the legal system, he quickly realized that there were too many criminals slipping through the cracks. That's when the decision was made. He'd fight crime by night as Daredevil, taking matters into his own hands to clean up Hell's Kitchen and right the wrongs that the law couldn't fix. Enter Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin. Fisk's Marvel Comics rise to power in New York's criminal underworld is a tale of ambition, manipulation, and sheer will. Initially starting as a bodyguard for mob boss Don Rigoletto, Fisk's ruthless intelligence quickly set him apart. He staged Rigoletto's assassination and took control of the Empire, rebranding himself as the Kingpin. Unlike other crime lords, Fisk wasn't just about raw power. He was strategic, operating under the guise of a legitimate businessman while secretly controlling all the illicit activities in New York. Now, here's where things get interesting. Daredevil and Kingpin's paths first crossed in Daredevil number 170, 1981, written by Frank Miller. At this point, Kingpin had actually retired from the crime game, but as it happens, when someone else tries to take over his empire, he's pulled right back into the game. Daredevil, on the hunt for corruption within the city, targets Fisk's operations unaware that he's about to take on one of the most dangerous and well-connected figures in New York. Fisk wasn't just some typical mob boss. He was a mastermind who knew how to manipulate political power and financial networks, and he had an army of enforcers at his disposal. Daredevil's usual tactics of punching his way through enemies weren't going to work here. Fisk was a threat not just because of his physical strength, but because of how he used his influence to stay above the law. One of their first big showdowns in Daredevil 171 saw Kingpin frame Matt's ally, Ben Urich, which forced Daredevil into a battle on two fronts against Fisk's goons, and the public perception of his actions. The back and forth between these two became a psychological war. Kingpin wasn't just trying to break Daredevil physically, he wanted to dismantle everything that Matt held dear. In Daredevil 172 to 174, Kingpin used deception, manipulation, and mind games to turn Matt's life into a living hell. Fisk understood that Matt's greatest strength was his unwavering sense of justice, and so he made it his mission to break that spirit. And this dynamic between them is what made their rivalry so intense. Daredevil, the moral crusader who would never compromise his principles, against Kingpin, the villain who thrived in the morally gray areas. Fisk didn't need superpowers or an army of mutants. He was just a guy with immense willpower, intelligence, and brutality. That's what made him so dangerous to Daredevil. He was a man playing in the big leagues, and Daredevil couldn't just punch his way through him. As Frank Miller's run progressed, the rivalry became even more personal. Fisk, who had taken on many heroes, found a real challenge in Daredevil, someone who could disrupt his empire time and time again. Their fight wasn't just about crime, it was about control, ideology, and who had the right to shape the future of New York. This cat and mouse game, especially in the Born Again arc, became the foundation for one of the most complicated hero-villain relationships in comics. By the time they hit that legendary arc, Kingpin was methodically tearing apart Matt's life, showing just how far Fisk would go to win. But even in those early days, it was clear neither of them would ever truly defeat the other. They're locked in a never-ending battle, and that's exactly what makes their rivalry so fascinating. Daredevil's early showdowns with Kingpin didn't just shape their individual stories, they helped to create one of the best hero-villain dynamics in Marvel history. Fisk's manipulation, combined with Matt's relentless drive, set the stage for a rivalry that would define both their characters. And as we get closer to Daredevil Born Again, it's important to remember that these early confrontations laid the groundwork for what is still one of the most enduring and fascinating conflicts in comic books. Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, is one of those villains who just won't die. Seriously, this guy has been through more comebacks than some of the best superhero villains in Marvel, and he's only gotten more dangerous with time. While he started out as a crime lord with a mix of raw strength and brains, Kingpin evolved into something far more sinister. A master manipulator who could control not only the criminal underworld, but also the legitimate world of politics. And his ultimate goal? Simple total control of New York City, no matter the cost. One of the most interesting things about Kingpin, though, is how much of his motivation is tied to his relationship with his wife, Vanessa. Unlike most villains who are just out there for chaos and power, Fisk's obsession with control has a deeply personal side. For a long time, he actually tried to leave the criminal life behind, all for Vanessa. She was the one person who could temper his darker side, and he genuinely wanted to be a better man for her. For a minute, he even gave up crime, trying to live a peaceful life with her. But, as you might guess, that didn't last. As soon as Fisk stepped away from the underworld, rivals saw an opening and pounced, sparking a full-on power struggle. On top of that, Vanessa's supposed death, which in some stories turns out to be a total fake-out crushed Fisk. That was it. He was done with trying to reform. With his heart broken and vengeance on his mind, Fisk dove back into the criminal world harder than ever. The Kingpin was reborn, more ruthless, and more determined to control everything in his path. Now, we know Fisk is a powerhouse, able to throw down with Daredevil in hand-to-hand combat, but his true genius is in manipulation. Instead of doing the dirty work himself, Fisk has an army of assassins, mercenaries, and supervillains at his disposal. One of his most dangerous pawns? Bullseye. This villain has perfect aim and loves torturing Daredevil, which makes him an invaluable tool for Fisk. Bullseye's kill count is absolutely legendary, including the heartbreaking moment when he took out Elektra in Daredevil number 181. That's one of those moments in comic history where you just can't look away. But even Bullseye isn't without his issues. Fisk never fully trusts him. Bullseye's erratic behavior and obsession with proving himself mean that he's both a blessing and a curse. Fisk knows how to play with Bullseye's mind, constantly pulling his strings while making sure he stays in line. And Bullseye isn't the only villain Kingpin has under his control. He's also used Lady Bullseye, an assassin who wants to outdo the original, Typhoid Mary, the Hand, and even major criminal organizations like Hydra and the Magia in his long game against Daredevil. By using these villains like chess pieces, he's constantly pushing Daredevil to his limits, often forcing him to face overwhelming odds. But here's the twist: Kingpin isn't just a street-level villain anymore. As his criminal empire expanded, so did his ambitions. Fisk realized that if he truly wanted to run New York, he needed more than just power on the streets. He needed to get into the political game. So what did he do? He ran for mayor. Yep, Fisk, the guy who used to rule through fear and violence, decided to use the system to his advantage. This move is explored in Daredevil 2018 by Chip Zdarsky, and it's a total game changer. Fisk's mayoral campaign wasn't just about getting a fancy office, it was a power play. By becoming mayor, he could legalize all the things he'd been doing in the shadows and make it almost impossible for Daredevil to operate. He passed laws that outlawed vigilantism, which pretty much turned Daredevil into a criminal in the eyes of the law. Fisk wasn't just a crime boss anymore, he was the law. But here's the kicker: despite his attempts to look legit, Fisk never really let go of his criminal roots. Even as mayor, he continued to manipulate things from behind the scenes. He was still the Kingpin, just now with the full weight of the city's legal system backing him up. This transformation from street boss to political power player made him way more dangerous than before. At the end of the day, Kingpin's whole story is a testament to his brilliance and his refusal to give up control. His strategy, whether through force, manipulation, or politics, has kept him in the game for years. And while Daredevil has knocked him down a few times, Fisk always finds a way to rebuild and come back stronger. For Daredevil, Fisk isn't just a villain, he's an ideological enemy. Daredevil's all about justice, even when the system fails, while Fisk believes power is justice. The new series picks up 5 years after the events of Netflix's Daredevil Season 3. Meaning Matt has had some time to heal, regroup, and probably throw himself into even more self-destructive crime-fighting habits, because let's be honest, that's what he does best. He's also looking to rebuild Nelson, Murdock, and Page, alongside Foggy Nelson and Karen Page, bringing some much-needed legal justice back to Hell's Kitchen. But here's where things get really interesting. Fisk is making a power play for the mayor of New York City, which puts Daredevil in an entirely new kind of battle. Beating up street thugs and assassins is one thing, but going up against a political mastermind with law enforcement, the media, and a public image on his side, that's a whole different level of trouble. Now, while the show is borrowing from Frank Miller's iconic born-again comic arc, it's not a straight-up adaptation, which honestly makes sense. The Netflix show already took some major elements from Born Again, and the MCU version is telling its own story. But expect plenty of high-stakes drama, brutal fight scenes, and deep-cut moral dilemmas as Matt and Fisk go head-to-head once again. Matt Murdock will also be going toe-to-toe with the Muse, a serial killer who uses the bodies of his victims in his art. Muse first appeared in Daredevil Volume 5, number 11 in 2016. With Born Again slated to bring both old and new conflicts to the table, it promises to expand on the complexities of Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk. Expect a tense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse as Daredevil is forced to navigate a city that has changed in ways he's never anticipated. It's shaping up to be a thrilling continuation of Matt's journey, a journey that has always been about battling for justice in a world that seems increasingly unjust. And if it's anything like what we've seen before, Born Again will be a perfect blend of street-level heroism, deeply personal stakes, and ruthless villainy. Daredevil fans, prepare yourselves for a wild ride. What are you looking forward to the most in Daredevil Born Again? How do you think Daredevil and Kingpin's rivalry will play out? Tell us in the comments, and remember to subscribe. Thanks for watching CBR. See you next time.